Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today. We've been doing these conversations for about a year now, and we invite in leaders in local government to have a discussion around what they're finding successful in the way of engagement, how they're going about preparing for the use of their federal ARPA dollars as communities start to come out of the pandemic. But it really is for the purpose of just sharing ideas and perspectives and approaches around engagement. You know, engagement has never been easy. And as you start to think about all of the challenges that we've all been going through over the last couple of years, these kind of conversations on how you can help residents feel connected to their communities just becomes all that much more important. And so these conversations are designed to just share ideas and perspectives and things that are working for communities. And hopefully you'll be able to pick up a new perspective or something that you might be able to use in your work, or just to gain a better appreciation about local government. The schedule and the agenda goes pretty straightforward. I will do a quick introduction of our panelists, and we have two panelists participating in the conversation today, and then we'll queue up the questions and allow them to give their responses. Generally, these sessions take about an hour if I do my job well in managing the time, and I'll do my best to do that. But hope you find the conversation beneficial for the work that you're doing. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm really happy to introduce Steve Williams. Steve is the Assistant City Administrator and Chief Financial Officer for the city of Conroe, Texas. Prior to being in Conroe, he worked for Flower Mound in the budget office, as well as in the city of Dallas as a senior budget analyst. Steve's been very active in the profession, as well as the community. He's involved with GFOA and ICMA. I always like to see people's activity in the local community, and Steve has been active with local civic groups and YMCA, and has got some involvement with the educational system. The one thing though, Steve, that really caught my attention is the fact that you are a black belt karate instructor, and that is very impressive. Probably comes in handy being a city manager or in the city management world to have that skill set. But it's just really nice to see that, and that you're an instructor for kids and adults, and working in your community in a variety of different athletic capacities. So thanks so much for being part of this conversation. And I would love to turn it back to you and just to have you fill in a couple of the gaps.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. Like you said, involved in the community, and I've been in the profession for right around 25 years. Did start out in the city of Dallas. My background is mostly I began in the budget and financial forecast world, and grew over time into overall finance, and then eventually into more of the city management realm as an assistant city manager. I still retain the title of chief financial officer by charter in our organization. So I do have a finance director essentially underneath me that runs the day-to-day. I oversee a variety of departments for the city, mostly our administrative and internal service. I have a couple of outward-facing departments as well. So when we're talking about engagement and interaction with the community today, there's customer service is a big part of what my span of authority in the organization is all about, and feedback and connection with the community, as well as with, and quite frankly, our internal customers as well, is critical to what we do every day. So.
That's great. And Conroe is about 90,000 population, I think I saw, right?
We are actually, to give you a little bit of background on Conroe, if this is the appropriate time to do that, I came here in 2005. We were just under 40,000 population, and we are right at 100,000 now.
Wow.
So we are growing at our growth rate has really picked up. There are several publications that have kind of listed us as a top boom town in the country. We are doing this year about 3,000 single family permits, and for which, you know, in the grand scheme of things of a major central city, that's not a lot, but for an exurb like us, that's quite a bit. Whereas we were doing 1,800 the year before, and 1,500 before that, 1,200. So we've really accelerated, and probably another 1,500 apartment units on top of that, as well as new businesses. So we are located on Interstate 45 north of Houston. So it's a natural progression and a natural growth pattern pushing out towards us. we're kind of next in line. There's a community called the Woodlands, which is just south of us, which is gained a lot of notoriety around the country for being a master plan community. And we're just north of them. So it's kind of our turn. So.
Yeah, that is great. And of course, then you had all sorts of environmental issues, challenges in that way. So really glad that you're going to be part of this conversation today. Thanks for taking the time. Yeah. Let me introduce our second panelist. Lisa Brown is the Director of Strategic Management at the City of Rock Hill, South Carolina. In her current role, she's focusing in on public information, strategic planning, performance evaluation, all of those critical things that help to assess and help to kind of ascertain how well a community is doing and the kind of setting the plan out for the community's future growth. So really important stuff. Prior to her being in Rock Hill, though, she served as the budget analyst and strategic and performance manager, I guess also in Rock Hill. So she's been there for some time. One of the things, Lisa, that was impressive to me is just to kind of recognize that in your role, you've helped the City of Rock Hill to get the Certificate of Excellence in Performance Management from ICMA. So congratulations on that. That's a nice recognition to receive from ICMA. Thanks for being part of the panel. I would love it if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about your background and anything else you'd like to share.
Sure, great. Thanks, Matt, and so nice to meet you as well, Steve. For the past 9 years, I've been at the City of Rock Hill. My role has grown. So I started off in the budget world as well, and kind of grew into strategic planning and performance management. The City of Rock Hill has a pretty robust history of strategic planning, is really guiding where we go as a community and really having a lot of buy-in from the community and from the business community to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So for just over a year, I've been responsible for public information as well as kind of city council agenda. And I think it's been really helpful to really have alignment and to have somebody that's really looking at how we're moving forward from an elected official standpoint, as well as kind of what we're accomplishing from the employee side. So a little bit about Rock Hill. Instead of being north of Charlotte, we are south of Charlotte, just over the border. And so we have about 75,000 people in the city limits, but we, although not growing as quickly as Conroe, I mean, we've seen steady growth over the course of time. And I think as Charlotte continues to grow as a hub in the Southeast, we'll continue to see growth and development in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's great. Both of you are bringing in just great skill sets for this conversation. So thank you for finding some time to be part of the conversation, Lisa. Let me go ahead and kind of introduce the topic. The session title is The Value of Community Engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. You know, I mean, engagement in local government has never been an easy thing to accomplish. And then as you kind of lay on the pandemic, all of the civil unrest, all of the kind of just political conflicts that have happened in our communities, and all of those kind of overlying kind of things has just had a huge impact on our ability to connect with our residents and to understand what their needs are and expectations are. And so now as communities are starting to work their way through and out of the pandemic, and you have the ability to take advantage of these federal resources, we're interested in exploring a little bit about how you're preparing to use those resources and how you're engaging in your residents around that. You know, we have done a ton of research and working with communities over the past 25 years. And we know that less than 20% of the population have really ever gone to a city council meeting. But everybody has invested in the community. And so we do know that there's an increasing level of interest in being connected in the community. And in fact, during the pandemic, our research will show that participation levels have actually increased because we are all forced to kind of introduce technologies because you couldn't meet in person, and that just provided people more opportunities to connect. And so even through all of the disruptions, communities have been able to find ways to maintain that level of trust that you all need to have. and to engage with the public on things that are important for moving the community forward. And so the intent of the conversation today is just to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and how you are preparing for the use of the ARPA funds, as well as just the strategies that, particularly with those hard to reach populations that we're all interested in connecting with, how you're going about doing that. So there's 3 questions that we want to kind of explore with each of you. The first one is, how are you identifying community needs and priorities that you're going to be thinking about as you start to spend the federal dollars through the ARPA program? The second is, how do residents, how does their input impact or guide the delivery of the services that you provide in the community? What role do they play? And then finally, as you do engage with the community, what are you finding successful, and what kind of tips or creative approaches can you share with others about how to set up successful engagement strategies and programs? I'm particularly also interested about how you're tracking your performance as a community and the methods that you're using for doing that. So with that, let's go ahead and start kicking into the questions. And Steve, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Sure. So
Steve, let me queue up the question for you. Just 1 second. Yeah. Steve, if you could you share how you're going about in identifying the community needs and priorities that you're going to be considering as you start to consider using the ARPA funds?
Sure. So we actually so far have received about almost $16 million in funding, but the reason why I queued it up as far as the city's rapid growth at the beginning of the conversation is to frame the discussion of how I'll answer a lot of these questions. Conroe, when I got here, was still too big to be a small town, but not big enough to be a big city. And so we've gone through a lot of growing pains over the years, and we're getting there, right? When you're in a rapid growth environment, you tend to trail a lot of the quote unquote internal structure that you need, or even community engagement. Lisa was mentioning about how strategic planning is something that Rock Hill has invested heavily in. We are, even though that is something that we should make a priority, quite frankly, it's not something that we've made a priority and built the proper structure in place to do a lot of the things that we need to do, as far as in community engagement being one of those, right? So we do a lot of planning and we do a lot of forecasting, and but our major needs are driven by our budget and by our growth. So a big challenge that we have is our capital improvement program. Well, for us, that means we have $450 million in identified needs over the next 10 years, and the ability to fund about 100 million of that, total. So we are always looking for ways to offset projects. For us, that $15 million went straight to water and sewer projects. And it'll probably continue to be that way. We did get a smaller amount of money that was related to our fixed route transportation, public transportation system, and to help that operationally, as well as with some small capital replacement for buses and such. But as far as public health related expenditures, I mean, we don't, as a city, a lot of that is handled by we have a hospital district that the county-wide, as well as the county handles that function mostly. So it's not really going to relate to a lot of the service delivery that we have. So I think the cleanest, easiest way for a community like us is to pump it directly into our capital improvement program, primarily water and sewer. Water and sewer is a major challenge for communities like us in Texas because of the rapid growth that the state overall is seeing, as well as our area. So.
Yeah, in such a fast growing area, I totally appreciate you're almost kind of running faster than you can think 5 years out, because of the speed of that growth, which is pretty impressive, by the way.
Well, it's impressive, but it's not good. We should be doing those things. So
yeah, I totally appreciate that. I see Lisa skirmishing back over in the back. As you have kind of gone through the last couple of years, especially as you've given some thought, have you included the community in some of those conversations around community needs in any particular way?
As far as the ARPA funding or like American Rescue Plan funding, no, because the way it has transpired here is we're not large enough to be a direct recipient. Well, we are now, I guess. There's direct receipt of funds, but prior everything was funneling through the county, and our county is a very conservative county, and they did not necessarily distribute the funds to the cities the way they did to the school districts and some other entities. And in fact, we had a lot larger allotment as a state that got used, at least in the first round of funding. This next round, we'll receive it directly, but I'm assuming the future funding will be similar. As far as community engagement, we engage the community in our planning process and our capital improvement process. For example, we have a major road project that's $120 million bridge and road, et cetera. And there's quite a bit of community engagement around that particular project because our Department of Transportation, is involved. They're the major funding source for that. So in terms of our capital planning and our budget planning, we do engage the community in kind of your more traditional ways. We don't necessarily go above and beyond, but I think you're going to get to that in the next talk about a little bit more in your next question or subsequent questions. But as far as the ARPA funding, it's going to go straight into our capital improvement program for the most part.
Yep. No, totally appreciate that and totally understand that. Absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Yes, sir.
Lisa, can you talk about how Rock Hill is undertaking your community needs assessment in preparing to use the federal ARPA dollars?
Sure, happy to. So it's kind of under two buckets is how I'll talk about this. So first is really the planning side of me and the strategic planning, because one of the things that we've created over the course of time with our council and with our departments, as well as our employees, is we're on a 3-year cycle for our strategic plan. And every 3 years, there are certain data points that we collect as we go to build the new strategic plan. One of those is the National Citizen Survey. We do a business survey, we do an employee survey, and then we kind of do some deeper dives on data. So a few years ago, we did a regression analysis looking at what code violations correlated with what types of issues in neighborhoods to really think about the livability of a neighborhood. So we were then able to pinpoint in our strategic plan what things we wanted to do to improve the livability of a neighborhood. So that kind of iterative process allows us to look at data, develop a plan, and really every 3 years, we're checking boxes off. Of course, the pandemic made some things a little bit more challenging, but because the way that we see community engagement is it is data driven, and data is really, really important, but we also can't forget the public perception. And so an example that comes to mind is something like safety crossing a street. So the data, we may not have an accident, we may not have a pedestrian get hit, which we're thankful for, but there's near misses and there's a perception that a road is dangerous. And so I think the way that we've used strategic planning and we've used this kind of data and public perception that we've gotten from these different surveys is if a group of business owners or residents say that they think there's a concern with traffic and they want a pedestrian crossing, we're going to go get some paint and we're going to get a quick win and really go answer the concerns of those residents and businesses. So I think the strategic plan helps in a lot of ways. The stars kind of aligned in some ways during the pandemic. So we had the comprehensive plan update, so our long range plan that has to be done every 10 years and then updates every 5. So that happened at kind of a similar time where we really were thinking kind of more broadly. So as we grow and as we develop, we're in the midst of upgrading our water and sewer plants, which is a massive undertaking. So I fully understand and can empathize with Steve's capital needs because those things continue. And as the wholesale provider for water and sewer in the entire county, we have a responsibility to make sure that that is taken care of and that we're not running behind. The second part of, I guess, more directly related to ARPA funds is when the vaccine rollout started, there was not a statewide effort, so we don't have really strong counties that were taking on the role of a vaccine clinic. So us in partnership with our local hospital, led our mayor led the charge really to start a vaccine clinic. So in less than 2 weeks, we went from we need a vaccine clinic to running one. And so it was entirely run by volunteers. And, we ended up over the course of time, we're finally done. And now a third party's running it, but we did over 50,000 shots, put shots in arms. And, a lot of our funding we felt like the need was there and we had to do the right thing to make that happen. So I'd say that those, the second piece of that really more related to ARPA, but more in general, just planning and thinking through.
Yeah. Lisa, when I set these panels up and invite people to join in, I never pay attention to whether or not you're a customer or not. So good. I'm glad you're using our tools. So thank you. And I'm glad they're feeding into your strategic planning process. Well, I think that makes a really great sense. Does the 3-year cycle work for the community pretty well?
For sure. And I'll also add in, we do the data and then we build our initial plan. So take, for example, our council just approved our most recent plan in May. It started July 1 of 21 and it will go for 3 years. But we make tweaks. So we do a mid-year retreat with our city council and department heads in January of every year. And we say, this is your plan. These are the things that you said you wanted to do. Here's how we're performing mid-year. So we do monthly updates. We do quarterly updates. But the kind of mid-year retreat is really where we sit down and say, you said these are all the things that you wanted to do. Here's our stoplight. Are we doing it or are we not? And if we're not doing it, we have to stand up in front of council and say, you wanted a 90-second call hold time and we're not meeting those metrics. So these are the things that we're doing to try to get there. Sometimes that goes better than others, but we revisit it. So at that January retreat, if there's things we want to tweak or change, or we feel like certain measurements or thresholds to tell if we're successful or not, sometimes those get modified. And the pandemic, I think, was a prime example of, when everything stopped and changed, we looked at our strategic plan and said, is this still valid? Are we still working towards these efforts? And if community meetings are a part of it, are we figuring out what the outcome is to have an engaged and informed citizenry?
Yeah, that's excellent. I love to hear you talk about how you kind of keep it alive by continual revisiting the plan and checking in with the council, and it holds everybody kind of accountable, doesn't it? But it also just really gives you the guidance to know what direction you're going to be taking the community. So really important stuff. Thanks so much, Lisa. Steve, let's move on to the second question. Can you talk about how community input influences how you are meeting resident and business needs?
Absolutely. Sorry, I muted myself. I'm right by major roads.
You're great. You're fine.
We do a lot of the traditional things. We do surveys, community meetings, really pay attention to resident and customer feedback, as well as public hearings. So kind of to just really touch, I don't think that a lot of the things that I just mentioned are very unique compared to other cities. We focus with the surveys. We're currently doing, for example, a survey for our downtown, kind of undergoing we're an older city for Texas. We're about 120-year-old city. So we're under a downtown revitalization right now. And so we are doing a community-wide survey to really focus in on our downtown. We also do other surveys, related to Parks and Rec, as well as capital improvements projects, like I mentioned before. But nothing necessarily on a consolidated basis. It's really specific to those areas. Community meetings, for example, we just recently updated our comprehensive master plan, and that was pretty extensive in terms of community involvement and feedback, multiple meetings. We did get some valuable feedback from the community. Our comprehensive master plan, as we all know, is made up of multiple master plans, parks, roads, our capital improvement program, our the variety of downtown master plan, all rolling up into our comprehensive plan. And we were able to engage the public on most of those. Some of those items we engaged, I would say we're better at it than in others. But the comprehensive plan process was a good engagement process. Also, especially from my perspective, two of my outward facing departments are the municipal court and utility billing, or what we own the water and sewer utility. So making sure that we are really paying attention to that customer feedback that we get. Of course, you know, with a municipal court, nobody's happy. There's never a happy customer coming to pay a ticket or go to court. So, but it is a really valuable customer service opportunity. We can deliver excellent customer service, and we can also get great feedback from the community while we're doing those things. Same thing with water and sewer billing and garbage billing. It's a challenge sometimes, but we get a lot of great feedback. Public hearings, you know, we do budget. This is my 27th municipal budget to do this year, or 28th, whatever it is, 27th. And I think maybe we've had 2 people speak, you know, ever. It's just not something that a lot of folks speak on, unless it's a really, you know, public hearings in general, unless it's a relatively controversial issue, we don't get a lot of feedback and participation that way. In the past, we have with annexations, where we've annexed additional land into the city. We've definitely gotten feedback there, but the public hearings haven't had a lot of value. Now, I'm going to touch on something that I personally and our organization is committed to, is really committed to, and is a great way. And if other cities aren't doing this, I encourage them to do it. And you touched on it on the intro, Matt, is that service clubs and participation in the community. We really encourage our employees to get out there, not just department heads, but our employees in general, management, mid-level management, to get out there and participate in service clubs. We actually have the largest Lions Club in the country. It's an 82-year-old club, and our multiple city employees have been in leadership. I'm currently the president, but we have, you know, it's a staple in our community with 330 members. So being out there and involved in Lions Club, Rotary, Kiwanis, and then also things like our homeless coalition, the food bank board. So we really want to connect with the community at all levels and get that feedback, so that the people who are out there are comfortable approaching a city employee and asking. We also have another organization, which is the functions, it's Leadership Montgomery County. Chambers of Commerce all over the country do this, all over the world. I'm sure you guys have it as well. We're hosting a session in City Hall today, and it's an excellent way to be out among the community and really get that honest feedback and good unfiltered feedback. So I know I harped on that last one a little bit, but it's really something I think is valuable, and that not a lot, where I came from, we didn't do that. And my previous city was not engaged in that capacity. And I think being part of the Chamber of Commerce, being part of all of those things are really where you're going to engage people one-on-one, business owners as well as residents. So.
No, I totally appreciate that community partner engagement benefit. Absolutely. Steve, just kind of curious, doesn't surprise me to hear you talk about your budget numbers of people that are showing up. Did you sense over the last couple of years? Well, it really had 2 questions to quickly touch on. One is, did you sense that your engagement levels increased or decreased or changed over the last couple of years? And then secondly, because you're in such a rapidly growing environment, does that stir up community engagement in any particular way or level? And of course, we'll talk about some of the strategies in the next question, but I'm just kind of curious about what your experience has been.
Yes and no. There has not been an uptick in engagement. Conroe is, like I mentioned, an older city, so it has a core of residents that have been here for generations. And then we have a lot of people who are moving their business here and moving into the county, and our county in general is growing pretty fast. So a lot of folks, it's like a lot of places, they're engaged in their family, they're engaged in their church and in their business and their work, and there's not a lot of time to, unless it's something that reaches out and touches them, like a drainage issue in their neighborhood or something to that effect. There is not a lot of public engagement really seeking us out. So we have to really go out and find that engagement and talk to our residents. I think, what was the second part of your question?
I was just kind of wondering whether or not the rapid growth,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
generally when you see people get a little bit more active.
You know, for us, it has been unusual because even with COVID, we experienced, not to get off into the weeds about our budget too much, but the city limits is about 75 square miles, but then we have this area called our extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is just outside our city. It's another 325 miles. So we have a large area. It's about 100,000 in the city, but another 170, 180 surrounding our city. So a lot of our budget is funded with sales tax, and property tax is the other major source. We do not have an income tax in Texas. So those are your two primary legs of the stool as far as funding. That being said, with that growth, people in Texas tend to focus on their property tax rates.
Yep.
And if you're not raising those, you're in good shape, because sales tax will go up and you can raise their water and sewer rates. And there's some more of an understanding of that because it's an enterprise. But, you know, with that added growth comes additional assessed valuation or valuation that you can tax. And you don't necessarily have to raise the rate, even though people's reappraisals and their values may be going up. You know, we're able to increase our revenues because of the growth. And as an organization, in a rapid growth organization, you tend to be chasing, your service level tends to be chasing the growth.
Right.
Eventually, since trees don't grow to the sky, you'll catch up and you'll level off. But, you know, I think as far as when people see things as fine, they don't want to engage, or it's okay, so they're going to leave it alone, if that makes sense.
Yep, I understand that totally. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for responding to those add-ons. Appreciate that. Lisa, can you talk about how community input influences how you go about, or how the community goes about meeting your resident and business needs?
Sure. So I know I kind of talked a little bit about it earlier in our strategic planning process, but I think that there's a strategic plan is kind of a much higher level. And so I think, you know, the 30,000 foot level works really well for elected officials and, you know, department heads, but really when it matters to residents and when it matters to neighborhoods, you can't be at 30,000 feet. And so I think a lot of what we have tried to do with neighborhoods is we have a department called Neighborhood Services, and their job is solely about engagement with neighborhoods. Because, you know, I know you put it up originally, but one of the things that I love about the National Citizen Survey is it breaks down the facets of community livability, because that's really why people live where they live, is what makes it a livable community. What's important to me in my neighborhood may be different to you or to anybody else in your community. And so when we look at the livability of a lot of our neighborhoods, a lot of our older neighborhoods, there's a pride. Their family grew up there, their mom, their whole family's there, their friends are there. And so for them, a lot of their livability in their neighborhood is tied to these things that it doesn't matter what city government does, that neighborhood exists for them for that reason. And so I think a lot of our resident input is, we've realized it's not, a lot of people don't fill out surveys. And I think we can all agree that when you go to CVS and you get that super long receipt, I mean, not many of us are actually going through with the survey. And surveys are important, but I think a lot of it is meeting people where they're at and building advocates and trust in those neighborhoods. Recently, so we had a downtown revitalization effort 5-6 years ago that's obviously worked. We've got a lot of new buildings and residences, and things are changing. Our downtown looks very, very different now than it did before. But one of the things that we've always heard is the south side of Rock Hill has been left out. This is a southern city that has a lot of history that wasn't always right and it wasn't always fair. And so I think if you look at demographics, the poorest part of our population lives in the south side. So there's been a community effort. So there's a few people in the community that looked at our downtown revitalization effort and said, why can't we do this on the south side? There's a historically Black college that's kind of in the middle of the South Side, and they have formed what they call the Clinton Connection. This is Clinton College. And the Clinton Connection has really been a community-driven event and effort that took right at 2 years to get community input from these neighborhoods and from these people. I think a lot of them, if they saw the city logo, they went, oh, I haven't paid my water bill, they're cutting off my electricity, somebody's coming to take my house. It was all this distrust. And so I think having these community advocates that are people in the community and finding ways that there are trusted people in those communities, and how can we get them engaged and involved? So simple things like, did you know that we have boards and commissions? Some of them didn't know. And so how do we get these people that are trusted people in these neighborhoods and communities to apply for and want to be on a city board? It's helping make those connections to where those people now serve on boards. And if there's stormwater problems, they know somebody on the stormwater advisory board that can help kind of work on some of the trust, and then also kind of guiding where we're working. And so the Clinton Connection, they've worked for over 2 years. The city agreed to partner in, so a couple of our staff members just help facilitate, set up meeting space, get whiteboards, things like that. We paid for a consultant, so then it wasn't us giving them a plan, it was a plan that was the communities that they've now brought to us. We're collaboratively working with that group to now figure out how we implement that action plan to really see some change in growth and development on the South Side.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really appreciate you bringing up the two aspects that I always held close to me when I was a manager. One was that people are mostly connected at their neighborhoods. And so if you can keep people happy at their doorstep, generally, they're going to be pretty happy around the community. And then secondly, which I think that we take for granted a lot, and you only can really understand it if you are understanding what the values of the community are, and that is that community pride aspect. Who doesn't want to be proud of where they live, right? And so if you can build a culture and a way to get people connected so that they can be bragging to their friends where they live, that is a true sign of success. So, and it sounds like you have done, the community has done just it's part of your organizational culture. And so a lot of the work that you're doing is just really solid in that way. So congratulations on all of that.
Thank you. I can say, mosaics, and this is a recent thing, is murals. So this is something that we really haven't ever gotten involved with. They started popping up in city government, of course, and one side of you is, hold on, is this allowed in our code, and what does this mean? But I think one of the biggest things we did was there is an artist that lives in one of the neighborhoods, and there was an old park, and the park needs money and it needs some investment. But one of the things that we let them do was this artist went and painted it. It wasn't anything crazy. He painted the backboards of the basketball hoops. He painted the ground. It was nothing that was that. But the fact that here you have this concrete pad that has bright colors, the basketball, it speaks to this neighborhood, and the fact that this is something that is now a central place, where before it was just that rundown park, but now it's, have you seen this mural that has taken over this basketball? So it's things like that aren't massive amounts of money, but just help reinforce that pride.
That is very cool. Congratulations on that. I hear more and more these days about how performing arts, visual arts, the impact that could provide on neighborhood strength and just kind of overall community vibrancy. And yeah, very, very cool. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Steve, let's kick on to the third question. Can you talk about in your kind of fast growing environment, what do you find successful in the ways that you do engage with your residents and your community stakeholders? Love to hear about that. And then to the extent that you can, kind of help us get a sense for how you are tracking your community's performance.
Right. So some of the things we're doing as far as improving resident engagement, we really want to improve our outflow of information. We are right now we're working on building a true public information office and head up a department per se that can head up all of our efforts in terms of outflow of information and quite frankly inflow too to the public, and focusing on social media, our website, our website is quite frankly stale, needs to be redone. And some of our social media that we utilize, it's utilized great by one department, but not necessarily great by another. Interaction when things happen, we're kind of in the hurricane corridor, so that those come around every once in a while. Being able to respond to natural disasters quickly and in a consolidated way, just that's something that we are actually right in the middle of putting together to really hone up and just make sure we can maximize our efforts for information to the public. Kind of I want to mention again to the service clubs, right? I mean, that's something that we're going to continue to push, that direct involvement in boards and commissions. Like I said, that community, we found that's really been successful in helping us engage the public and boots on the ground. We can do a lot of things electronically, but I think boots on the ground are really valuable. And I can really appreciate what you said about if you can serve somebody at their front door or meet them at their front door. I mean, you're exactly right. Y'all probably have it too, but Nextdoor and some of those apps that really, we have neighborhoods that get out there and information starts flowing. If you can get out to that level and address something quickly or even proactively, I think that goes a long way. And tracking performance, I'm a little bit envious, Lisa and Rock Hill, y'all strategic planning, big part of the strategic plan is performance measurement and that back end measurement and seeing how it relates up to, are you meeting your objectives and are they working towards those goals and fulfilling your mission and is it all flowing back up? That's something that we need to work on, and we track performance individually as certain departments really well. Some do it really well, kind of like the outward flow of information. But others need help, and as an organization consolidating it all, if you want to dashboard it and report back quarterly and things like that, we've actually got some work to do in that area. So
Steve, I'm kind of curious. I hear more and more about homeowners associations in Texas. Are they very present in your community, and do you take advantage of those groups at all in any kind of organized way?
No, we do not. The community I was in before did, because every new subdivision was required to have a homeowners association. Here, all of the new subdivisions have a homeowners association, and it's a little bit different. Here, the subdivisions, when they're new, the HOA or POA, Property Owners Association, is controlled by the developer until it builds out to a certain degree, and then they turn it over to the residents. So to give you an example, the neighborhood I live in is about 2,200 units and about 5,500 people. And so the property owners, and it's gated, so it has private streets, and the city doesn't take care of that. So the Property Owners Association has to handle that. So we do engage in certain issues with the POA. We also have a lot of special districts in Texas, especially in the Houston metro area, called municipal utility. There's a variety of them, but the most prevalent would be municipal utility districts, or MUDs. And really all that is a mechanism to fund water and sewer drainage in parks infrastructure in an area, in a development. But that acts as somewhat of a quasi-governmental, it's a subdivision of the state, but it acts as in our unincorporated areas, kind of as the de facto city government, they don't provide the full service.
Yeah, no, I've got that. Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have them too. They just come in different forms. So.
Yep. And I think they're kind of becoming more prominent around the country. Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate the challenges that you have in your environment. You got a lot of stuff going on, and thanks. Lisa, can you share some of the strategies and tools that you're finding successful in with your engagement work?
Sure. So I think, the typical, what Steve was saying earlier, I mean, nobody really comes to public hearings unless they're super mad. But, that's not to say that we're not doing a good job. And I think part of, the strategy is, if you go on Nextdoor, which, or Facebook or any of those social media, I think you get a lot of people that are really upset about things. But there's this whole, unspoken majority of people that are obviously okay with what's going on because they're paying their bills on time, they're doing what they're supposed to, they're putting their trash out, and there's no problems. And so I'd say, that going back to the neighborhoods, kind of meeting people where they're at. I think one of the biggest things, so we've had our current mayor for the last 4 years, and one of the big efforts that he has made is to use the faith-based community in a way that we hadn't really used them before. So he has at least 2 times a year, they will sit down and he'll say, talk to me, what's going on, what do you hear, what do you see, and where are the issues? And it's amazing, pastors, they love to talk, and they will tell you anything you want to hear, especially in the South. I mean, it's an important part. And so I think even as churches have kind of morphed, maybe they're more on Zoom and not necessarily in person, it's been really profound to have kind of an in with people in churches where, we can call a church and say, hey, we're doing, we have this program to help people pay their utility bills. Let's say we're a full service city, so electric, water, sewer, garbage, it's all in one bill. But we can talk to churches and say, put this in your bulletin that, we have this funding available to help people with their bills. So I think kind of meeting people where they're at, not just neighborhoods and kind of churches, but there's so many opportunities to really get in. I'm a mother of young kids. It's amazing even just the circles that people run in at parks. If you know that you have programming for parks, putting that information where the people are is so much easier to get your message out. And so I think just taking a step back, I think a lot of the strategies are taking a step back and not thinking from the perspective of the government and the seat that you sit. So much more of it's thinking about, if I didn't work for the city government, where would I get information? Where would I find out about things? And so much more of that, of people working and living their lives, if you're able to meet them where they're at and think about their lives and how they see things, I think is super helpful. To the second part of the question, really about tracking performance, it takes a lot of work, and it's not something that is just, if anybody has a system that can spit out reports that give you exactly what you want, that would be great. But the reality is, it's really figuring out what those KPIs are that really matter to your residents and to your elected officials. And so, so much of that, we internally use a SharePoint site, and that has been just really helpful. In that SharePoint site is every department. There's a data person in every department that's responsible for getting us, like I said, we work really collaboratively with our departments to make sure that they understand what they're putting into the system, what they should be measuring, how they should be measuring it. Something like response rates. Does it matter when somebody picks up a phone to call, or is it when the police car actually leaves? Like, how do you define response time? So I think being really clear with departments, working with them and understanding their systems. But the SharePoint site has been just, we've had it for 4 or 5 years that somebody internally built. Everybody plugs in their data that we use then for our monthly, quarterly, and biannual reports. But it's been really helpful, I think, for management as well, because they have a dashboard that all of this data feeds. And so what are the top 10, 15, 20 things that our city manager cares about? And it may be things like cash flow or, attendance at events or whatever those things are. So a lot of it's just starting somewhere and accepting that the data will be imperfect, but you got to start somewhere and really find a way to track what you're trying to track.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It is hard to maintain, but it's so critically important for really understanding where you are and where you need to go. And I'm just really impressed by what I sense is the community's success on getting systems in place under your leadership and making it work. So congratulations on and all of the work that you're doing and for the great engagement work that you're leading up. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Let me just kind of wrap this up a little bit because I know we're getting to the top of the hour and you've got things to do. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing things that are going on in the community and the ways that you are connecting. Steve, I have to say, I totally resonate with your comments about trying to make your organization connect into the community, because it is boots on the ground and making those human to human connections through service clubs. It's very impressive that your Lions Club is as large as it is. That's very cool. Because that tells you a lot about how people look at the community and where you're connected. And of course, Lisa, the work that you guys are doing and just the organizational culture that it seems like you have developed around data-driven strategic performance management that incorporates engagement as part of that is just such a critical thing and such an important thing. So this has been a really great conversation, and there's a lot of good stuff that I'm sure people are going to benefit from as they start seeing this. I will follow up this session and get you connected with each other, so you've got the data or your information for each other. If you know of other folks that might benefit from being on a panel like this, let me know. I'd love to include them. Always looking for creative successes on engagement and ways that communities are succeeding. As I mentioned earlier, you'll start to see these highlight segments showing up on LinkedIn probably within the next week or so. We cycle them out over the course of a week or two, and I'll make sure that you get them so that you can share them with your local networks. And I really appreciate you sharing it, because people who know you and respect you will benefit from and will want to hear on what you're sharing and what your ideas are. So thank you for doing that. Every week I get the opportunity to meet leaders in local government. It's the greatest job in the world that I have. And today was no exception to that. I really appreciate meeting both of you and hearing about the work that you're doing, and just wish you well on everything that you've got going on.